Have you ever stared at an exam question and just wondered, how do I make sure I get every single mark? Well, today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're cracking the code on question 8A from the 2024 OCR GCSE computer science paper. And we're not just finding the answer, we're going to learn to think like an examiner to see why it's the right one. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the exam challenge itself and decode the algorithm at the heart of it. Then we'll get super clear on what that keyword, maintainability, actually means. After that, we'll pull back the curtain on the 2 perfect, mark scheme-approved answers. And finally, we'll see how this whole thing makes you a way better programmer in the real world.
All right, let's get into it. You can think of every exam question as a mission. And, well, today's mission is a pretty important one.
And here it is. Our mission, straight from question 8A, is to describe 2 ways to improve the maintainability of the algorithm. Now, it sounds simple enough, but those 2 little words, maintainability and algorithm, that's where all the marks are hiding. And what's on the line? 4 crucial marks. You know, that can easily be the difference between grade boundaries. So how do we make absolutely sure that every single one of those 4 marks ends up in your pocket? Okay, so before we can even think about improving this algorithm, we've got to understand what we're looking at in the first place. Let's decode this thing. So here's the algorithm we're working with. It's pretty straightforward, right? It just grabs a random number between 1 and 512, sticks it in a variable called p, and then it keeps asking you for a direction until you type either left or right. Simple, but it's got some real problems.
And here's problem number 1. The variable is just called p. P for what? Page? Power? Penguin? Seriously, without any other context, we have no idea. This is a classic sign of code that's a nightmare to maintain.
And it's the exact same story with the variable a. Yeah, it's holding what the user types in, but the name A tells us absolutely nothing. Imagine coming back to this code 6 months from now. Would you remember what P and A were for? No way. And that right there is the core of our problem.
This whole problem of confusing code leads us straight to that key word from the question, maintainability. To get full marks, you have to prove to the examiner that you know exactly what this word means.
So what is it? Maintainability is basically all about making life easier for the next person who has to look at your code. And that person could be a teammate, your teacher, or, it could even be you in a few weeks. It's all about writing code that's easy to read, easy to understand, and easy to change without breaking the whole thing. Okay, we get the problem, we get the goal. Let's look at how to snatch those first 2 marks. And for this, we're going straight to the source, the official OCR mark scheme. The first perfect answer is to use meaningful identifiers. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying you should give your variables and functions sensible names that actually describe what they do. Now look at this. What you're seeing on screen, that's the exact wording from the mark scheme. This is what the examiners are trained to look for. To get that second mark for this point, you have to explain why. You use meaningful names, and I'm quoting here, to describe what they store, or to show the purpose of the variable. It's that simple. And this just shows you the difference so perfectly. Instead of P, we use position. Boom. The code immediately makes more sense. Instead of A, we use answer, or maybe direction. It's such a small change, but it takes the code from confusing to crystal clear. All right, so we've got our first 2 marks in the bag. Let's go ahead and lock in the final 2 with the second big improvement. The second way to boost maintainability is by adding comments. Those little notes for humans that the computer just completely ignores when it runs the code. And again, the mark scheme spells it out for us. You add comments to make it easier for other programmers to follow or understand the code. You're basically explaining the why behind a line of code that might not be super obvious at first glance. And here's a perfect example. Just popping a quick comment like #generates a random starting position right above that line of code. It instantly tells you what's going on. Even if the variable name wasn't great, this comment saves the day. So we've cracked the question, we've secured the marks. But I want to wrap this up by explaining why this is so much more than just a little exam trick. Here's the bottom line. Using clear names and helpful comments aren't just things you do to pass a test. They're the absolute fundamental habits of any good programmer. This is what separates messy, amateur code from professional, solid software that big teams can work on for years. And that brings us to a final thought. Go take a look at some code you've written, maybe for a school project or just for fun. How could you apply these 2 simple rules, meaningful names and helpful comments, to make it better? Because mastering this isn't really about passing an exam,
It's about becoming an expert.